Beta Epsilon chapter of Sigma Lambda Gamma National Sorority Incorporated, and I'd like to extend my thanks to everyone who came today. Sigma Lambda Gamma was founded on April 9th, 1990 in the University of Iowa by 5 amazing founding mothers. We're a multicultural sorority founded on 5 principles: academics, community service, cultural awareness, social interaction, and morals and ethics. And our motto is culture is pride, pride is success. In honor of our principle, cultural awareness, every year we host an annual event called Women Exposed Series. In the past, we've spoken about African, Latina, Muslim, and Asian American women, and this year we've decided to speak about Jewish women. We'll be talking about a number of different topics, including how they are portrayed and perceived and how they define themselves. It is important to remember that the panelists cannot speak on behalf of the entire Jewish community, and our goal today is to create a safe space and facilitate positive discussion between our panelists and the audience. There will be time for a question and answer at the end of the discussion, so please hold any questions or comments until then. Again, thank you for coming, and please don't let the dialogue end here. And now we're going to have Monica come, and she's going to give us a little presentation.
Hi, so we're going to start our presentation. So one of the first things that many people tend to think about Jewish women is from the images that we often see in the media. So many people are probably familiar with Monica Geller and her character on Friends, and then Barbara Streisand as like the kind of eccentric, crazy, overbearing mother in Meet the Fockers, and then Rachel Berry in Glee, and then Fran Fine as the very outlandish nanny. And a lot of these roles, I think, are based off of common stereotypes of Jewish women. And one of these really common stereotypes is the Jewish American princess, or the Jap. And these girls are usually portrayed as bossy, spoiled, whiny, really self-centered people. And there's also like the nice Jewish girl who she just wants to get married and like have her family and raise them with, you know, all the Jewish values and ideals. And kind of going off of this is the overbearing Jewish mother, who she's really naggy and overprotective, and she's always getting involved in everything in her children's lives, even when they're fully grown, and just always giving her 2 cents, and kind of a lot of times throwing in that Jewish guilt that you hear about often. And then there's also the idea that Jewish women are always trying to be cheap, trying to look for a really good bargain. And these are a lot of things that we tend to see in the media about who Jewish women are and kind of what they stand for. And then on the complete other side of the spectrum, there are really strong Jewish women in both the media, in like the limelight, but also people who have made really great careers. So some of these people are Diana Agron, Barbara Streisand, Natalie Portman, and Joan Rivers. These are all like in the media. But then there's also Sheryl Sandberg, who she's the COO of Facebook, and she's really involved in Women for Women International. And she's a very, very powerful businesswoman, and she's kind of making the way for both women and Jewish women specifically in the business world. And then there's also Golda Meir, and she is the first Jewish prime minister of Israel. And then there's Gloria Steinem, and she was a very influential woman in the 60s and 70s in the feminist movement, and she's a journalist. So kind of playing off of a lot of these stereotypes, we just wanted to show 2 short clips that kind of exemplify what these stereotypes sometimes are portrayed as, and kind of the really popular images that the public tends to see of Jewish women.
Find the most part to find the really friend.
When it goes on your finger, you say I do.
Oh my gosh. I don't want to see an engagement from the future. I'm going to fly so fast.
I want this relationship to work.
Your insecurities aren't my issue.
So that's just kind of the stereotype of like the Jap, like the really just over-exaggerated, snobby kind of everything has to be perfect all the time person. And then the other clip we have is of the nanny, and this is just kind of a stereotypical Jewish mother who's just completely involved in everything that her children try to do.
One. Oh, forget it, Ma. I'm not doing this. Fine. That's your choice. It's good to have choices. Not that I had a choice when I was in labor with you for 10 hours with that big head. Sorry, it won't happen again. Darling, do it for me. It'll shut Jack up once and for all.
Oh, Ma, is it really so important to you that I have to pretend to be something I'm not?
Would you?
Hi.
So these are just common media portrayals of Jewish women and how they tend to act. But now we're going to hear from some Jewish women on our own campus and the type of background that they have and how it's shaped who they are.
So panelists, please come up, please. Thank you all once again for being here, and thank you panelists for being part of this event. So our first question will be very general. So if everyone could just please say your name, your year, and where you are from.
My name's Gabby. I'm a sophomore, and I'm from New York City.
I'm Kayla. I'm a senior, and I'm from Baltimore.
I'm Julia. I'm a junior, and I'm from Florida.
I'm Allie. I'm a junior, and I'm from New York City.
And I'm Kalia. I'm a freshman, and I'm from New York City.
Thank you. So to get right into it, we're just going to start off with our first question. So our first question is, how do you identify within the Jewish faith? Orthodox or non-Orthodox? Reform, conservative, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, etc.?
Okay. Can everyone hear me if I just talk like this?
Yeah.
Okay. So my family is generally conservative, but I go to a Reform temple, so I probably consider myself more Reform.
Can you hear me also? Okay, so I went to a conservative Jewish day school, and then I worked at a conservative camp, and I went on the conservative Gaffer program. So I would say I'm very conservative.
I go to a conservative temple, so I'm conservative.
I go to a Reform temple that seems conservative from the outside perspective, but I feel more Reform.
I am modern Orthodox. My father is a rabbi, so I follow Orthodox rules.
So on to our next. Do you think being Jewish is a cultural background, religion, or both?
So I am struggling with this question right now, actually. In my thesis, I'm writing about Jewish identity, and one of the things that the sociology professor that I'm working with asked me was that question. And I don't think that there is one answer for everyone who's Jewish. I think that, like on Dickinson campus, that Judaism is usually a cultural identity that people that come to Dickinson, some people have told me that they feel very strongly about the religious aspects of Judaism, but I would say most people feel a connection to, bagel brunch and Hillel, and that's what Judaism means to them. For me personally, I think that there's elements of both, that having prayer in my life is important, but for the most part, it would be a cultural definition of Judaism.
I think for me it really depends on where I am in my life. So there's definitely been points where my Judaism has felt more of a religious part of me, whereas other points in my life I feel like it's much more of a cultural identity, but I would say it's definitely both overall personally. And it just depends on whether I'm practicing my Jewish faith through the things I do every single day or by going to temple every Friday. It really depends. I'd say on campus it's more of a cultural thing because I don't go to temple often.
I also think that something that's very grounded in Judaism, in the religious aspects, are the cultural aspects. You know, by going to temple, it's a very collectivist faith. You know, you have strength in numbers, and because we're such a small people, it's always very important to be connected to other people in your community. So just by having like a very typical Reform upbringing, the cultural part of my identity became more important to me than the religious part of my identity, because that's where I make my friends. That's where my family sees each other often. And at college, because I'm not with my family and the friends that I established, it was important to establish that same type of community here.
Yeah, I feel like at school it's more of a cultural thing for me. When I'm at home, I go to services every Friday and it's more religious. But here I don't really feel the connection to that so much, so it's definitely more culturally than religious.
Actually, this question leads very well into our next one. So how has your experience at Dickinson College impacted your identity as a Jewish woman?
Being from New York City, in high school, you know, a lot of people were also Jewish. And I'm from Washington Heights, which is an area with a lot of Jewish people and a lot of Dominican people. So, you know, it's not like there weren't people around with my faith. But at Dickinson, just for example, I'm an RA, and during one of like our introduction sessions this year, we did a step up, step back if you relate in a certain way. And out of 60 people in the room, I was the only Jewish female. So at Dickinson, I feel a little bit forced to recognize that part of myself in a more prominent way than I would at home. And it becomes a larger part of my identity because I feel like if we're underrepresented, then things can be said that aren't true, and that you need to, you know, maybe play more on that part of your identity than you would if you were in a predominantly Jewish area, or if there were just more Jews around.
Off of that, also I think that people recognize it as a larger definer of who you are. Just because, like, if I were to say in my public high school, oh hey, I'm Jewish, nobody bats an eye, and I think here, if I make some kind of allusion to a Jewish holiday, or say something about just my Jewish identity in general, I think people do a double take more so. Not in a negative way, just like it surprises them because they don't realize it, and then when they realize it, that's kind of how they see me. And they see me as the Jewish girl. So.
It was really hard for me when I first got to Dickinson because I was used to being surrounded by all Jewish people, and like Gabby was saying, like when I start to say something and like people are like, "What are you talking about? Like that's so Jewish."
Somebody asked me like what Hanukkah was today, so that was interesting.
Yeah, I got a lot of that. I keep kosher, and every time I go to a meal with someone, like it ends up coming up that like I eat differently than they do, and I think that that more than anything else has become like a signifier of who I am. That people like think like, oh, like Kayla can't eat that. Like, it was just a difference because when I was at home, like everyone talks about keeping kosher, and like it's not like something that I need to explain to anyone that I'm around. So it's different.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part for me, like being here, because like at home I would always keep kosher, and my parents were very strict about like what to eat, and I never really had to worry about the food because my parents would always provide it. But like here, it's really hard for me to keep kosher just because like it's not my mom's cooking at the like kosher like dining service at the cafeteria, so it's kind of different from like what I'm used to. So yeah.
The next question. Based on the images in our prezi here, to what extent are the stereotypes true or false? So for example, the example of the Japs, being greedy, the nice Jewish girl, being cheap.
I think that coming from New York and living in Queens, I have a lot of friends who live in Long Island, and I think that a lot of them would probably fit the stereotype of being a Jap, but I don't think of them that way. It's not even that it fits them, it's that that's how people see them, and that's how the people see who they are, and that's not, I don't think that that defines them at all. And I think that people see that and they assume that that's true for everyone when it's not. And I also think that I get so many people making jokes about my mom, about her being like an overbearing Jewish mother, and she calls me all the time, and she checks on me, and I just think it's her way of showing love, and I think that just because she's checking you all the time doesn't mean she fits the overbearing mother stereotype. So that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that my mother and my grandmother would seem like that overbearing in the nanny, but then you have to ask yourself, if you're not Jewish, like, is your mother overbearing? Because she might be. And it's just, it's not a stereotype about your mother. And do you like a good deal, like a good bargain? Because I think that most people do. I mean, a lot of stereotypes are just, focused on a certain people. But then you can look, for example, like how Bernie Madoff right now is like, and for the last few years has been this huge symbol of what Jews can do to business. And like, do you know like how many people were committing fraud that weren't Jewish? It's just like we're pointed out and pointed in the direction of those stereotypes just because they exist in our communities as well, but they exist in every community.
Going on with that, I saw a BuzzFeed this week that was like 32 things Jewish girls can't resist. And I posted it on my friend's Facebook wall who wasn't Jewish, and she was like, I like all of those things too. Like, I think that, kind of what Ali said, it's, people have these stereotypes, and so then when someone who's Jewish does something like that, they're like, oh, that's so Jewish of them, but other people do it too. And I remember when I was looking at colleges, I kind of was thinking, as a high school senior, I was like, the Jaffe girls, girls that are Jewish American princesses, they all wear North Faces and Uggs, because that's the style now. And then I went to Franklin and Marshall, and everyone at Franklin and Marshall was wearing North Faces and Uggs, and I was like, how can this be a Jewish stereotype if the entire school, obviously Franklin and Marshall is not a Jewish school, almost everyone that goes there is not Jewish.
And the funny thing is about that, you say Uggs and North Face, when I think of Jaffe girls, I think of Juicy Couture. It's different for everybody. Everyone defines it in a different way, and I think that it just says something that you can't define a group of people by what they do or what they wear. And you might have some friends that do this or some friends do that, and it's just everyone does everything. You can't define a group of people by what they do.
Next question. What does being Jewish and being a woman mean to you? Do you ever feel like you have to identify with one cultural, racial, gender group, or ethnic group over the other? And do you ever combine them? It's a very in-depth question, but it's very connected. Does it need me to repeat it? Or no? Okay.
Well, for me, there definitely have been situations where I feel like I have to identify with one culture over the other. I get a lot of questions like, oh, where are you from? And when I tell them I'm Hispanic and Guatemalan, they're like, oh, so you speak Spanish and everything. I'm like, no, actually not. And then in different situations when I go to Hebrew school or something, they'll be like, wait, you're Jewish? What's going on here? You're a Mexican Jew or something? I'm like, no, thank you, no. And I mean, it's just in different situations where I have to identify with different things. Obviously when I'm in synagogue, I have to identify with being Jewish, but I also want to identify with being Hispanic as well. It's definitely hard having the two of them.
Yeah, going off of that, I grew up in Harlem, and that's a predominantly African American community. So when people saw me, they automatically thought I was Black and also Christian. So it was never, people never assumed, oh, you could be Jewish or that my family was Jewish. And even when they saw my dad wear his yarmulke and stuff, they just thought that was I don't know the term like for like the Muslim hat, but they just thought it was that. And so like I always like I felt closer to like African American people than I ever did with other Jewish people, because I felt like I was more accepted in the African American community. Well, before they found out I was Jewish, and that was a different thing. But like I feel like before they found out I was Jewish, I felt like I was more accepted within the African American community. But like with Jewish people, I never really fit in, nor did they really see me as a part of their group, because I look different than them, so it was kind of awkward. So I kind of stayed more towards like African Americans and Hispanics in New York City. So
I think that it's very empowering to be like a Jewish woman. I think that being a minority means like kind of having to prove yourself. And I've like enjoyed that part of my identity, and I've enjoyed like identifying with it.
I also think that there's another interesting aspect of being Jewish is how American you feel when you're Jewish. I went to Israel 2 years ago, and when I was there, I was surprised at how striking it felt to think about the fact that if anything ever happened here to the Jewish people, that Israel was the only place that I would be safe. So that really made me think about what Judaism meant in my identity versus what being a woman meant in my identity or being American meant in my identity. And it became like equally as strong as how I identified as a woman was how I identified as Jewish, because I figured that if anything ever happened to me, like that would be the automatic part of my identity that would, you know, oppress me. Like that's the only part of my life that makes me any part of the minority population. And that's like a very strong feeling that it's that important in your life.
Next question. In your experience, is there any specific hardship or specific instance that you remember that comes with being a Jewish woman?
I think coming to campus was really, really difficult for me. I actually had an experience on campus my freshman year where I was talking to someone, and we were talking about holidays, and I told them, we were just having a conversation, they were talking about Christmas, so I was like, oh yeah, I'm going home, and we're going to celebrate Hanukkah, and blah, blah, blah. And she like, did this like, she looked at me, and she was like, you're Jewish? And I was like, yeah, I'm Jewish. And then she was like, I thought Jews had horns. And I was like, it really surprised me. It really, and she's like, we were having such a nice conversation, and she seemed like such a nice woman, and I was really enjoying talking to her, and then all of a sudden she did this thing, and she caused me to do this like double take, and I was like, wait, what? And she was like, do you, like, I don't even know. It really threw me, and I didn't get upset by it. I think it was just more of a chance for me to combat some of the ignorance that there is about what Judaism is, especially because I think that a lot of the stereotypes about Judaism are associated with like the Antichrist, which I mean, like that's another story. But so yeah, I think that was one of the hard things I had to deal with, is like some of the lacking knowledge about the Jewish community.
I had a similar experience when I was in Charleston, South Carolina, last year or 2 years ago. I was like working in a soup kitchen on Christmas Day, and like one of the men that I was serving asked me like, oh, like why aren't you with your family on Christmas? And I was like, well, actually I'm Jewish. And he like looked at me, and he kind of like gave me this look of pity, and he's like, I'm so sorry, like, can I help you? Like, he was like, you know that like if you don't accept Christ, that you're gonna go to hell, and like you seem like such a nice girl, and I really want you to like not go to hell. And I was like, I'm really okay, like I'm sorry, like have a nice Christmas.
That is definitely something I've gotten even in New York. It's like, accept Christ as your savior. I'm like, thanks, I'm good. I got my own God.
And it made me really uncomfortable, because like I really respect people that are extremely Christian, and like I really respect people that feel strongly about their religions, but I also feel strongly about mine. And I did not expect to be like pitied for my religion because I find it empowering.
I never really had a hardship because I was Jewish, because people don't think that I'm Jewish. Surprisingly enough, my hardship was from fellow Jews while I was in my confirmation class. It was because of like being Hispanic, and like I kind of touched on it before. They referred to me, they were just like, "Oh wow, you're a Mexican Jew. Why are you here? Like, what's going on?" And I was like, yeah, like I'm Hispanic and I'm Jewish. Like that's possible. And I think normally people just think of the ignorance like outside of a religion or outside of a culture, but like there's ignorance within the religion and within the culture as well. So.
I agree. Growing up, I went to a Christian private school because my parents wanted me to be well diverse in different religions and respect other religions. But my dad talked to the principal and told them like, "Oh, I don't want my daughter saying like the Christian prayers just in respect to her religion and stuff," and they respected that. But the kids did, like when I didn't say the prayers, the kids were like, "Oh, why aren't you praying?" And I was like, "Oh, that's because I'm Jewish." And like once I told them I was Jewish, it became like, "Oh, you're going to hell because you don't believe in like Jesus Christ," and like I've never met a black Jewish girl before, so you're automatically lying. And like people like stopped talking to me, and it became like in like first grade, I had no friends in my like Christian school because like nobody wanted to talk to me. So it was like a very like difficult thing for me growing up because it was just like, wow, people like just didn't want to talk to me just because of like ignorance and stuff. So.
Tell us about how you feel you are perceived on Dickinson College campus.
It's fine. I think that a lot of people think I'm very religious, which is funny because I don't think I'm very religious, especially on campus. When I'm home, I'm definitely going to temple on a regular basis, but here I don't do that at all. And I've had a lot of people turn to me and say how religious I am. I've actually done a couple of things like people ascribing different definitions to me without me knowing, and I happen to get religious a lot, and I don't know what it is. I think it's because I identify so much with my Judaism as a culture that it's something that defines me as a person, and when people notice that and they see that, they kind of automatically assume that I'm a very religious person when I'm not necessarily a religious person just because I do certain things that are culturally Jewish.
I agree with that. I don't necessarily have the stereotypical characteristics of Jews that I look other than, my curly hair. But I think that my friends, my two roommates, are both Catholic, and there's like a lot of perception as like I'm the go-to for Jewish knowledge, because like the Hillel here is pretty active, and I'm like a part of the board this semester. We just end up having a lot of conversations about Judaism when we're with our friends, and like the automatic assumption is just like turn to me for any questions, or it's once again it's that like I feel like a representative of the Jewish people, even if I'm not that knowledgeable. Like I didn't go to Jewish day school. I didn't even pay much attention in Hebrew school, so but like just because there's no one else around, sometimes like I feel like I'm perceived as like the token Jew.
I feel similarly. Like people ask me all the time like questions about Judaism, but unlike you, I went to Jewish day school and I do have a lot of background in it. So like I love answering those kinds of questions, and I do often have answers to them. But I think something that was interesting for me when I was 18, I chose to go to Israel for a year before coming to Dickinson, and while I was there, that's when I started like keeping Shabbat and keeping kosher, which meant that I wasn't going to like use my cell phone on Friday nights and Saturdays when I came to Dickinson and I wasn't gonna like mix milk and meat and I wasn't gonna do homework on Saturdays on campus. And people, I first got a little bit of backlash from my friends at home that they were kind of judgmental of me. Because they said, well, why do you still like wear pants if you're so Jewish, if you're so religious? And they said like, and why do you still like go out and drink alcohol? Because it was like in Israel it was legal at 18. And they said like if you're so religious, like you wouldn't like drink alcohol. That's bad. And I struggled a lot with my identity because of that. But when I came to Dickinson, like I think that part of it was less weird, and the part of like me keeping Shabbat and me keeping kosher was like more weird. But I mean, I kind of just like owned it and like took it as like that is who I am. And it's still strange to me, like when I go home and people, my friends at home who are like more religious, some of them will wear skirts and like wear extremely modest clothing, and like they won't go out on a Friday night, or they won't like do homework on a Saturday, or get in the car on a Saturday. I think that was one of the other things that they kind of like questioned me about when I came back to America.
So, next question is, are there any issues that confront Jewish women within the dating sphere? Are there any specific stereotypes that you feel like that you've needed to combat as a Jewish woman?
For me, my parents basically require me to marry Jewish. If I date someone who's not, then one of the first things my mom will say to me is, oh, would he ever think of converting? Even though I might be like, I don't know, like 16 and I'm dating this kid, like I'm not gonna like, ask him to convert for me quite yet, but that's something that's definitely on my parents' mind. But I think it's more so because like Judaism is kind of viewed as like a almost dying religion or whatever, and I think that a lot of parents just want to instill the importance of being Jewish and Judaism in their children from an early age, and like want to pass on just the religion to like another generation to just keep going. So
I definitely have the same experience. It's never outwardly said, I don't think. It's never like, you must marry a Jewish guy, but I think it's very implied. And I think that it's interesting because there's a lot of situations where interfaith marriage is really, really looked down upon just because Judaism is such, it's a religion that's really based on lineage. And the idea of like having a parent that's not Jewish is just, it's not something that you see. And I think it's more prominent now. I work in a Hebrew school when I'm home, and I have a lot of students who have one parent that's Jewish and one parent who's not. I have a lot of students who are not white. And I think it's much more accepted now, but it's still really looked down upon. And I think the most interesting thing about it, honestly, is that it's not doing any good for us to keep marrying only Jews, because, and this is something that like, I don't know if anybody knows about if they've taken genetics. Tay-Sachs is something that's really common in the Jewish population because people in, especially Orthodox communities, keep marrying the same Orthodox, religious Orthodox people, and it creates problems genetically, and children who have genetic disorders. So it's an interesting dilemma. You want to keep the faith alive, but at the same time, you kind of need new people to keep the faith alive. So.
Growing off of that, I mean, a lot of there was a study recently that came out through the Pew Foundation, which studied Jewish Americans, and it showed different statistics about, in 2013, like what does a Jewish American look like? And like intermarriage rates have gone up to about 50% at this point, according to this research that was done this year.
That's much more like representative of what I deal with in Hebrew schools
I mean,
now.
I think that's why it's like I think this statistic is pretty accurate because they interview people like from all across America. And I talked to my grandmother about it after it came out, and she was saying things like, there is more intermarriage, but there's also a lot more like unaffiliated Jews that like they're started out with like one denomination of Judaism, and then they broke into 3 branches, and now there's like 6 or 7 different branches of Judaism that like are subcategories of each other and stuff. And in this same like statistical study, there were like 30% of Jews don't affiliate with any of those denominations. A lot because they're from intermarried families where like the parent that's Jewish just like instills Judaism in them and not really like any kind of denomination. Like they're not necessarily going to say, oh, I belong to a Reform synagogue. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, and I'm Jewish, like I celebrate Hanukkah, but I don't belong to a synagogue or anything. And I think that that's like becoming more and more popular in the United States. For me, like going back to the dating and marrying thing, I think that it's really important for me to want to marry someone who is Jewish, and I think that like when I meet new people, I'm very aware, like if someone says they're not Jewish, I'm almost like, okay, well I'm like not interested anymore. I mean, not
You try to keep away from the temptation of it. That's the thing. It's like you don't want to get into a situation where you're dating somebody who's not Jewish for a long period of time, and then you really like them, and it doesn't work out because you know that you can't marry them. And it's not like, I wouldn't say that if I were to date a Jew, like a Christian guy, and he was really, really great, and he was like, totally supportive of the fact that I wanted to raise my kids completely Jewish. Like if he was okay with that, then maybe it'd be a different story, but you don't want to put yourself in that position. I'm sure that other people probably have similar beliefs about their cultures or their religions and marrying their own type.
I definitely agree. I think that, my parents, they harshly suggest that we marry someone Jewish, but it almost became something that I internalized because my dad's side of our family, who were all Holocaust survivors before him, decided to marry Christian women except my dad. And so then we had a tiny family as it was because they were all from Germany and a lot of people died. So then now we are the only living Jewish people in our family on that side. And my brother is dating a Christian girl who I think he will marry. So it's kind of like inner guilt that you feel. But it's also interesting because from like what Julia was saying, from a young age, you're kind of looking at, you want to marry someone Jewish so that it's easier for yourself. But once again, like you don't want to have conversations like, oh, will you be uncomfortable raising our children Jewish? But unfortunately, in my opinion, I could marry someone that's Christian. I think it would make it harder because some values are different or some experiences are different because you do have like the common culture of the people that are Jewish. But at the same time, like I'm just uncomfortable having that conversation so quickly on, and it's that important to me that would make it or break it, that it's just, you kind of seclude yourself off to just dating Jewish people.
And our last question. Have you ever felt pressure to conform to a particular image or look, culturally or physically?
I think growing up in New York, even though there was a large Jewish population, I felt very, very pressured to conform to Christianity. I was really, really disappointed that I didn't get to have Christmas like other people. I remember thinking that Christmas stuff was so cool, but at the same time I was happy that I had Hanukkah. So that was something difficult when I was growing up, and I think here also, I'm pressured to conform in the sense that, like, I don't go to services because everybody else goes out on a Friday night. And, if I'm in services or have to get up for services early Saturday morning, I'm not exactly going to go out until 3 a.m. with my friends. So it becomes a matter of trying to decide between your religious and cultural life and also, like, your social life. And it's just difficult sometimes because people don't take it into account.
That's true. I would say that's probably why I stopped keeping Shabbat, because there was no way I could go through an entire Friday night and Saturday without texting people, because that's how you communicate at Dickinson. But other than that, I don't think that I've ever tried to conform to more I mean, I tried to conform to more Jewish stereotypes, when I was in Israel. Not stereotypes, more Jewish traditions and practices. But I didn't feel pressure to do it. It was a choice that I made for myself.
I think one thing that's probably very relatable for many people in the audience is I've never felt pressure as an individual to be somebody that I'm not, and I've never been sad that I'm not Christian. I'm very empowered by my Judaism. But hair is one thing that's it's the only thing that I'm sensitive about, because I don't have a big nose, and but your hair is just it's the only thing in my family that screams Judaism. My dad and my brother both have these big fros, and here at Dickinson, it's a lot of people have the straight hair that I always wanted to have when I was younger, and so you try to tame it. Right now, this is very for me. This is a good day. So you don't I didn't really think about stuff like that before I went to college, and then the partying culture became a larger part of it, and dressing up became a larger part of it, and you want to look nice and you want to look like other people, but at the same time then you wake up the next morning and you're well, this is still my reality, but that's okay, I guess. Things could be worse.
It's funny that you say that, actually, because I want to clarify. I didn't want to be Christian. I wanted to identify with other people who were my friends that discriminated against me because I wasn't like them. So the whole straight hair thing is a very big deal. I used to straighten my hair constantly, and it was a very long time before I didn't. And I also, for a really long time, was dying to have blue eyes. Did anyone else do that? Okay. So that was the thing. All my friends had blue eyes and blonde hair, so I got blonde streaks in middle school. Worst mistake of my life. No, seriously, we're not even kidding here. And I also considered getting the colored contacts. And I never ended up doing it, but just the fact that that's even a thing, yeah.
Yeah, I think conforming was a big part of my life. I felt that I needed to conform into African American stereotypes almost, just because I fit closely with that race, and my parents even kind of conformed in a way. Instead, my dad, he wears the garments that Orthodox Jews wear, but he doesn't require me or my sisters or my brothers to wear the same clothing, just so we can feel more comfortable within the environment that we are in. He never wanted us to feel outsiders in Harlem. He wanted us to feel as within the community as possible. So he let us wear what we wanted, and he let us make a lot of our own decisions growing up, which I thought helped a lot, because he never really said, this is how you have to be, this is how you have to do it. And I appreciate that, because it allowed me to grow, and it allowed me to accept Judaism for what, for me. And it took me a long time to actually tell people, oh, I'm Jewish, and feel proud about it, because before I would be very scared, and I would kind of avoid religious subjects a lot. But I feel my dad helps me grow within and feel comfortable about who I am.
Thank you, everyone. Can we get a big round of applause for everyone? Now we're going to open it up to some questions to you guys, the audience. So please feel free to stand up and or raise your hand first, so if there's a lot of questions, so we can direct any questions to our panelists. It can be on anything that the questions that we discussed, or if you guys have a thought in mind.
Would you ever consider marrying a Jewish man who's not of your race? What would be, for your parents, what would be worse, that he's Jewish but not?
I have 4 adopted members of my family, and 3 of them are from different Asian countries. So my family has always seen diversity within Judaism as like a wonderful thing, and then like there's like the rise in like many adopted Asians from that are in Jewish families now, particularly in New York City. So I would definitely consider marrying somebody that wasn't white. It doesn't bother me at all. I think it's more important for me for them to be Jewish than it is anything else. And nice. I think nice is number 1.
I agree with that a lot. I think that it's not so much even it's not a race thing. It's the fact that Judaism is such it's like about the way you live. So if you're Jewish, you live a certain way, you have certain values that are kind of just accepted as like, those are what your values are. And if you're marrying somebody that's not Jewish, there's no kind of like definition as to like what their values are, and they're not necessarily the same as yours. So it's like a difference in like basic principle of how you live your life. So I don't think the race doesn't really enter into it. I think it's more of just the fact that this person shares the same core values as you do.
I agree with what's been said.
How strong of an influence does the Asbel Center have on your comfort level of identifying as Jewish?
I think Asbel makes me very comfortable because I feel like Asbel Center is like my first real Jewish community to me, because I've never really like grew up in a Jewish, like I never had like a Jewish foundation at home. I would always have like African American, Hispanic community to support me, and I feel like Asbel kind of opened up to me and kind of like accepted me for who I am, and like I feel like Asbel makes me very comfortable, and I'm like very happy that I have the Asbel Center because it's like my first real like I feel like Jewish home. So yeah.
My first year here, I felt extremely alienated from Asbel, and then I slowly started participating, and last year Kayla encouraged me to run for the board, and now I'm part of the board, and I've actually found that experience has made me a lot more comfortable there. I wasn't comfortable before I was involved, and now that I'm involved, I take a lot of ownership in what we do, and a lot more pride. But I definitely think that for some students, it's hard to go into because the levels of religion are very different. I'm a lot less religious. I was asked to be on board as the least religious perspective, and that's actually something that they need. They need somebody who wants to go to things for social reasons and cultural reasons, not for religious reasons. But it's a changing part of my identification here.
I really agree with that.
I think my experience is actually the opposite of Allie's, that when everyone comes into college for the first time and they're scared and they don't know who their friends are going to be, I 100% clung to the Asbel Center because that was what I knew, and I was my whole life had been Jewish up until I got to Dickinson, and so I was like, I'm going to study in Asbel every night, I'm going to make all my friends there, and it worked for me for a while, and then I was able to branch out and meet different people, but I think that it definitely was kind of like everyone else has said about it being a home for people that aren't Jewish. I think that definitely played a role for me, especially in my transition to college, which it worked out well.
So, I know how I feel about this personally, regardless of what my family says about dating in the Jewish community. I have a very, very personal feeling toward this. And a few of you did kind of answer this, but are your feelings about dating in the community based on your family or your own feelings? You don't mind asking.
I mean, my mother can say whatever she wants. I'm going to do what I want. The funny thing is I'm going to show my mom this video and she's going to hear me say that. She can give me what opinion she wants, and she can instill in me what she believes is important, and in the end it's my decision. And I think that to me personally, sharing those kind of core beliefs is significant. So I personally choose that I feel like I would prefer, if everything works out in my favor, to marry someone who is Jewish, because I feel like it would then be somebody who would come to temple with me and be able to pray with me and support my children in getting a bar or bat mitzvah, you know, like that kind of thing. It just makes life easier. If it were to not work out that way, which, I mean, hopefully it doesn't, but if it were to not work out that way, I'm sure that whoever I end up with will be someone who supports that, and that's all I really care about.
Would you be okay? Like, would you be?
I'm not gonna seek out to not be, right. So I'm saying, like, you know, I don't know, it would depend on the person. Like, I guess that's the thing. I'd be okay with it, but like, it would really depend on the situation and the person being supportive of what I wanted to do as a Jewish woman. So.
My family, for like 5 or 6 years, one of my cousins who I'm very close with dated a boy that was Catholic. And, you know, I thought it was kind of pathetic on my family's part that there were so many comments about, I mean, he's great, he's really nice, but, and it turned out in their specific relationship that he was just as religious as she was. So it seemed like if they did get married that their kids would be Catholic. But, you know, I have internalized some of the pressure from, you know, not only my immediate family, but my extended family about the fact that, like, if I didn't marry someone who was Jewish, that it wouldn't just be a few people that were talking about it, it'd be a lot of people that were talking about it. And that's not, like, it's not healthy. I should be doing what I want to do, but then in a way it's kind of turned into what I want to do just because, you know, I like to make my family happy.
For me, it's definitely easier to just try and find a Jewish boy to date because I know if I don't, like, of course I'd be comfortable dating someone who isn't Jewish, but I know that if I don't, like, my mom will just be right here, like, nagging in my ear, like, oh, like, he's not Jewish though, he's not Jewish, but
you guys aren't getting married, right?
it's just a plan, right? But like,
that's what she says.
I think it's a lot about the internalizing thing. I think that if my family wasn't happy, it would, like Alex said, like, it would make me unhappy. But I also agree, like, I think that because I have so many experiences within the Jewish world, like, finding someone who, like, shared those experiences would make it easier to connect.
And I also think, like, I definitely think that my family would support me regardless. Like, if I really fell in love with somebody and I was happy and I was, you know, safe and this person was a nice person, like, I don't think that they would be like, oh, well, he's not Jewish, so that, you know, whatever. Because yeah.
For the 2 women of color moving on, did you feel that in your Jewish communities you weren't accepted because you looked different, or did you just feel uncomfortable because you looked different? I wasn't accepted because I was Jewish. Like, my dad would go to, like, the Judea to buy, like, you know, Torahs or, like, zitzahs and stuff, and, like, they would, like, say, like, racial remarks to my father, and, like, instead of giving him the money in his hand, they would put it on the table, and, like, my dad would have to, but my dad wouldn't pick it up. He was like, I'm a person just like you give it to me in my hand. And, like, it was, like, this big confrontation and stuff. And, like, also growing up, I also had to deal with a lot of stuff from the Jewish community, which is why my parents didn't feel comfortable with sending me to, like, Hebrew school or, like, sending me to, like, a Jewish school. So, like, they felt comfortable with me being with people that I look like, and then just having my parents teach me, like, the Jewish ways and stuff. Like, so yeah, I feel like it was more of, like, my family were being attacked more than, like, you know.
And your dad's a rabbi?
Yes, my dad's a rabbi.
So in your congregation, what do people look like?
The congregation is mostly, like, my dad has people who are Christian in his congregation. He teaches them Hebrew, and also, like, there's, like, a few white people, a few Muslims and stuff, and I feel like they come just because my dad doesn't try to convert people. He tries to teach them more of like the religious aspect, and like, because he feels Judaism is about calming people down and not about hatred, it's about love. So he teaches more of that aspect than the religious aspect, because he's not trying to convert people, he's just trying to like show like African Americans that it's okay and like you can calm down and stuff. Like, you know, like kind of like that aspect, so yeah.
For me, it was definitely hard. I think it's both feeling uncomfortable and just people in my congregation were just kind of like, well, what are you, like, what are you? And I'm actually adopted, so my whole life I've just kind of been stuck between like do I identify with being Hispanic or like being Jewish or even being white because my parents are white. So it's just kind of those three things, like I have already said multiple times, but like people just see me for being Hispanic first before anything, before like knowing my background or anything, and then I always have to be like, yeah, I'm Hispanic, but I'm also Jewish, but then I'm adopted, and I always have to go into my life story. It was definitely very hard growing up Jewish and Hispanic.
So I know we've talked a lot about dating, but I find it interesting, so I'm going to pose this to you all. Generally speaking, and I'm going to make an assumption about society here, but if someone of a race were to say, like if I'm African American, so if I were to say I will not date a white man because he is white and I'm black, I won't date black men, people usually react negatively to that. That's racist, that's not okay, that's rude, that's not, like, why are you being like that? And yet, hearing you all say, oh, well, I would prefer, or I only will, or my family only really wants me to date Jewish men, it's kind of okay. And I'm wondering, do you think that's because of the religious aspect, or maybe it's because it's not a visible difference? I mean, what do you think makes it, in society in America right now, okay for that to be said and no one to be upset, whereas, you know, you have a different reaction to a different cultural quality?
I think that the big deal about it is that people think that all Jewish people are white, which is obviously not the case. And you see a lot of people who are Christian who are only interested in marrying other Christian people, and you see a lot of people who are Catholic who are only interested in marrying other Catholics because they feel like their religion defines the way they live their lives, and they feel like by finding someone else who identifies with the same life path, that would be the best way to raise children, because in that manner, you know, you can both agree on what you feel is appropriate for your children. And I think that that's the reason why it's kind of accepted for people to say like, oh, well, I'm Jewish, so I'm going to marry someone Jewish. Whereas I think race has become a really taboo subject, especially like interfaith race, because, I mean, interracial